Wow, everyone really braved the weather over here. It's been understood. Yeah. I almost didn't make it across down the block. I have down the block next door. It was too hot for me. Okay, it's good to see everyone. Let's talk about this week's parsha. This week's parsha is Parshas Korach. And I think I'm gonna make a guess over here. You'll tell me if this sounds right. If I were to do a little quiz over here as to what took place with Korach, what was the issue? The issue, as many people understand it, is that Korach and maybe some of his followers wanted to have positions of authority. Right? Does that sound right? They were jealous of Moshe and Aaron, and they were uncomfortable with the fact that they had their position, and they said, we should have positions of authority. Why you? Why not us? I think that's the way most people understand it. And then eventually what takes place is that the earth opens up, this miracle, and Korach and his followers get swept up.
That was my grandson's
Bar mitzvah parsha, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Right, I forgot.
That's right. Now that is a good-ish summary, but it really doesn't really capture the story. Yes, I made up a new word. But it really doesn't. Okay. So it really doesn't capture the entire episode, because as we start to read through the text, and we'll just read through a few psukim over here, we'll see there's a lot more that meets the eye. There's a lot more nuance, a lot more texture, and we're going to have to read it a little bit carefully to really appreciate what is really taking place over here. And okay, so with that, let's jump in. Actually, before we begin, I just want to read to you a statement in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Fathers, and we'll read it, and we'll come back to this statement. But the statement goes like this, at the top of your page. It said, what is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven? Ezohi machlokes l'shem shamayim. What is the dispute for the sake of heaven? Meaning, a dispute is not a bad thing. As Jews, we quote-unquote love to argue. But the truth is, there's argument found throughout every page of the Talmud. There is debate and discussion. Debate and discussion is not a bad thing. And the prime example of a good dispute is Shammai and Hillel. Hillel and Shammai were colleagues. They didn't always see eye to eye, but they had respectful and meaningful dialogue for the sake of heaven. Okay, what is a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and his followers. So the dispute we're about to read over here is the quintessential bad argument. Okay, this is the really bad argument, and so what we'll try to learn with that in mind is that, I hope not often, but sometimes we find ourselves in arguments, and it's important to use this narrative to try to think of what practical lessons we could learn from this bad argument. Why is this such a negative argument? What is so wrong with it? And what could we learn practically from this argument? So we'll come back to this little passage over here in a moment, okay? Or in a few moments. Let's begin. Let's read through the psukim. So Vayikach Korach ben Yitzar ben Kahas ben Levi. So Korach, the son of Yitzar, the son of Kahas, the son of Levi, took. And when it says he took, it means that he persuaded people to come along with him on his rebellion against Moshe. Now, what's interesting about the way that Korach is introduced? What is interesting about the name of Korach over here? V'yikach Korach ben Yitzar ben Kahas ben Levi. Let's read on and maybe it'll be a little more clear. V'dasan v'aviram b'nei Eliav. Okay, two other leaders with him are people by the name of Dasan and Aviram. They are brothers, the son of Eliav. V'on ben Peles. And On, the son of Peles, B'nei Ruvain, they're from the tribe of Ruvain. So what's interesting about the way Korach is introduced? Different than Dasan, Aviram, and On? More ancestors, right? When it comes to Korach, typically if someone is called up the Torah, or we're praying for someone, we normally say your name and the name of a parent. Father, mother, depends on the context, okay? But over here, it says Korach, the son of Yitzar, the son of Kahas, the son of Levi. Right? It doesn't just mention his father's name, it goes 2 more generations back, and we have to ask ourselves, why? What is it doing? What's it trying to tell us? Right? The Torah is a subtle book. It doesn't always say things explicitly. This is what, it's not always, it's subtle. So we have to ask ourselves, why with Korach does it list all that lineage? We'll have to come back to that, okay? But we know the leaders of this fight are Korach, Dasan, Aviram, and On. Okay, those are the 3 people in charge. Pasuk Beis, verse 2. Vayakumu lifnei Moshe, they stand up in front of Moshe. Va'anashim mibnei Yisrael chamishim umasayim, and there are 250 people. Nesiei Eda, Kriyei Moed, Anshe Shem. So in addition, there are 250 people who are princes, meaning these are leaders of the Jewish people. They are people who are called to all of assemblies, and they are people of renown. Okay, so these are very significant people that join along. Okay, so now we know that there's Korach, we know there's Dasna Aviram, we know there's On, and 250 very special people. Okay, we still don't know what their issue is. Okay, but we do know, as we see in verse 3, Vayikalu al Moshe vel Aaron. They gather against Moshe and Aaron. Vayomru alehem, and now we see what their argument is, and they seemingly collectively tell Moshe and Aaron, Rav lachem, you have too much. Ki chol ha'eda kulam kedoshim, the entire congregation is holy. Uvesocham Hashem, and God is with them. Umadua tisnasu al kahal Hashem, and why are you lifting yourselves up over the congregation of God? So if we were to pause over here and ask ourselves, what is the argument that Korach and his followers are telling Moshe? What are they trying to tell Moshe? How would you say it in your own words?
Jealous.
They're jealous, and what are they therefore saying? Therefore, what's we don't like the current setup. What's the alternative? What should the setup be?
We should not have.
Well, everyone, not that we, right? What do the words say? Let's move away from what we know in our head. We know in our head, Korach, because the way we're taught, that Korach wants to have a position of authority. But that's not what it says over here. What it says over here is egalitarianism. We're all exactly equal, right? No one should, right? What does it say? Kala eda kulam kedoshim uvesocham Hashem. We're all equal. Why do you lift yourselves up? We should all have the same complete egalitarianism. There should be no leader. We should all be the same. Now, let's see how Moshe responds, right? Because if that's their argument, then what do they want? They want everyone to have the exact same position. But the next words are quite telling. Vayishma Moshe. It says Moshe heard them. Now, obviously, Moshe heard them. He was talking to them. Is the Torah trying to tell us that, he didn't need hearing aids? What does it mean? Vayishma Moshe. Moshe heard them. He was able to hear. When you say you hear something, there are two ways. Sorry?
He paid attention.
Okay, it could be paying attention, but sometimes I would say there's two levels, right? There's I hear, I pay attention, and then I understand. Sometimes you say something, and sometimes you have to listen, right, kind of between the lines. What is a person really saying, right? So Vayishma Moshe hears this, he understands there's more to what they're saying, right? It's not just the words, but you have to listen closely sometimes. Vayipal apanav, and therefore he falls on his face. Vayedaber, meaning falling on his face over here as a form of prayer or a form of almost feeling overwhelmed. So what does Moshe do? And let's see how Moshe responds to them. Okay, so what does it say? Verse 5. Vayedaber al korach vel kol hadaso. Moshe speaks to Korach and the entire group. Lamar saying, Boker in the morning. Vayoda Hashem es ashalo. God will, so to speak, make known as to who is his, belongs to him. Vesakadosh, the one who is truly sanctified. Vikriv elav, God will bring close. Ve'es asher yivchar bo, whoever God chooses, yakriv elav. Okay, that's the one who God will make close to him. So what Moshe seems to be saying is that we're going to make a test. Who does God really choose? And he's going to tell us what the test is in a moment. But you hear Moshe not saying that everyone's going to win, but rather saying, who is the one that is going to be chosen? Right? Those are different, right? Let's read a little bit further. It'll become a little more clear. Verse 6, Pasuk Vav. Zosasu, this is the test. This is the duel. K'chulachem machtos, everyone take fire pans. Korach v'chol hadaso, Korach and all those who are with him. Utsnu v'hen eish, verse 7. Put a fire in the fire pan. V'simu alehen ketores, place incense. Lifnei Hashem, in front of God, machar, tomorrow. V'haya ha'isha sheyivcha Hashem, whoever is chosen by God, hu hakadosh, that is the Holy One. Rav lechem b'nei Levi, you already have too much, the sons of Levi. Okay, so what is Moshe saying over here? What is Moshe saying? Moshe is saying, we're going to make a test. Everyone's going to get fire pans. Everyone's going to put incense and a fire in those fire pans, and you're going to bring them as an offering in front of God, and God is going to choose which one of us is really going to be the leaders of the Jewish people. And Korach seemingly goes along with this. Right? Now, if Korach was really interested in egalitarianism, then this is actually not a good test. Because what is Korach saying? Korach's saying, we're all equal. Everyone has the same thing. And Moshe is saying, okay, let's make a test. Which one of us should be the next Kohen Gadol? Right? Everyone take a thing and we'll see which one's going to be the next Kohen Gadol. So what happened? What happened is that Korach wasn't being honest. Korach was saying, yeah, we're all equal. I believe in egalitarianism. And then Moshe says, okay, so let's make a test to see who's going to be the next Kohen Gadol. Korach's saying, okay, that sounds like a great test. Right? In other words, you see there's a gap over here between the words that he's saying and what he really wants. What he really wants is what you all knew already. But I just want to show you that text itself shows us there's a bit of a gap. Sometimes we're saying something, but we really mean something else. And Moshe, being a good leader that he was able to hear. Not just listen, but was able to really listen between the lines. it wasn't about egalitarianism. It wasn't about equality. It was about Korach wanting a position of authority for himself. Okay? Yes?
So the end of that, it says, you, the sons of Levi. So he brings up also the higher generation. So what's the connection? What's the...
Good. So it seems like, and it's also interesting because who's he talking to? He seems like he's talking to everyone, but it almost sounds like he's directing his comments to Korach because the other people own Dasan, Aviram, and the 250 people. They're not part of Levi. So it seems like there is one focus, or at least a significant focus on Korach, and it somehow has to do with being from the tribe of Levi. We're going to come back to that point in a moment, but good. Keep that in mind, and clearly this Levi thing keeps on coming back. Good. So let's now jump to the next paragraph of verse 8. Yeah.
The end of this is an overt criticism. Robert,
You already have enough.
It's asking for too much.
They're asking for. It sounds like he's saying to Korach, right? That's the one piece of criticism we see so far. You already have enough. Be satisfied with what you have.
And also, isn't the house of aren't the Levites supposed to be to serve? They're supposed to serve the Cohens, and they have a particular job. It's not like so they're stepping out of their lane altogether.
Correct.
The other ones are just whatever.
We don't know yet. Well, I mean, we haven't really. It's
For Reuben, though, they don't have a particular job.
right. So you're saying there we can understand their complaints a little bit more.
Separated out and have been given, and then what they have to carry and what they have to do in it. So.
Yeah, so let me just unpack what Rachel's saying. Rachel's saying, we could understand Moshe's criticism seems to be directed at Korach specifically, saying maybe the Reubenites and the 250 people we can understand a little bit more. They don't have anything, but Levi, you already have so much. They had jobs, especially in the Mishkan. They were the people who used to carry they were part of this very royal, regal procession that they had to lead, right? That's significant. And now you want more? Slow down. The other people, maybe there's less of a critique against. Okay, good. So let's look at Pasuk Ches. Vayomer Moshe al Korach. Moshe now turns specifically to Korach, and he says, Shimuna b'nei Levi. Again, he says, listen, the descendants of Levi. Again, this is the third time that Levi is being highlighted over here. We still don't really know why. But let's keep that in mind. Hama'at mikem, is it not enough? Kivdil Elokei Yisrael eschem me'adas Yisrael. Is it not enough, and this is kind of what Rachel was saying, is it not enough that God already separated you from the rest of the congregation? Lakriv eschem elav, to bring you, the children of Levi, to him. La'avod es avodas Mishkan Hashem, to do service in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. The lamo lifnei ha'eda l'sharsam, and to stand in front of the congregation, to serve the congregation. Vayakriv oscha v'eskol achecha v'nei Levi itach, that God already brought you and the entire family of Levi forward, elevated, uvikashtem gam kahuna, and now you want priesthood as well? Now keep in mind, nowhere in this dialogue does Korach say, no, that's not what I want everyone to be equal. Moshe was right. In other words, what Korach really is after is kahuna, is priesthood. Lachain, he says, and therefore, you're gathering against God. Va'aron mahu kisalinu alav, why are you arguing against Aaron? Okay, so now we finally see very clearly in this passage over here what Korach is after. Korach wants to be a Kohen. He wants to be part of the priestly family. He's not happy with being a Levi. What we don't yet know is, what do the 250 people want? We don't really know. We don't find Moshe speaking to them. Let's see if he does speak to them. Let's keep on reading. Let's read a little bit further, and we'll try to make sense of all this. So, Pasuk Yud Beis, Vayishlach Moshe, Likro l'Dasan v'la'Aviram b'nei Eliav. Moshe goes ahead and calls forward Dasan, Aviram, the children of Eliav. Okay, Vayomra, and they say, Lo na'aleh, we will not come forward. Okay, so this Moshe, who is the leader of the Jewish people, says, I'd like to speak to you, right? And they say, no, we don't want to speak to you. Okay, so already you see they're a little bit more obstinate. Korach, presumably, when he was called, he came forward. But Dasan and Aviram say, we don't want to talk to you. Okay, Hama'at, and this is the message they sent to Moshe. Hama'at ki alisanu me'eretz zavas chalav udvash. Is it not enough that you took us from a land of milk and honey? What are they doing over here? They're flipping it, right? This is their appropriation over here. The milk and honey land is, of course, the land of Israel. And they're going and saying, it's bad enough that you took us from a land of milk and honey. In other words, they're calling Egypt a land of milk and honey. It's bad enough that you took us from the land of milk and honey, okay? And la misina b'midbar, you're going to kill us in the desert. Ki sistarer aleinu gam istarer, and now you want to rule over us? And let's continue what their complaint is. Af lo el eretz zavas chalav udvash haviosanu. You did not take us to a land flowing with milk and honey. Vatita lanu nachal asad v'charem. And you did not give us a portion, a field and a vineyard, right? We had things that we were supposed to get. We were supposed to go to a land of milk and honey. Instead, you took us out of a land of milk and honey. We're supposed to get vineyards. We're supposed to get fields. We're not getting any of that. What's going on, Moshe? You're not living up to the alleged promises that you promised us. And then they say, even if you blind us, we will not go up. Now, what is that all about? It's a little bit of a funny phrase. Even if you blind us, we'll not go up. What is that like? Why are they saying that? If you remember, way back when we had a class, I think we had a class together on slavery in the Torah, and the Torah has a fascinating idea where if a person goes ahead and harms their slave in any way, then the person goes free, right? And I think we learned this together. And the point is that the particular actions which were done historically, which were seen as a way of showing mastery over a slave, the Torah says if you do those things, that is precisely what's going to cause a person to go free. In other words, back in the day, again, not even so long ago, unfortunately, people would go ahead and they would do whatever they want to their slave, and they would harm their slave physically. When that happens, the Torah actually says if you do that, the person goes free, right? And the most overt and common things that were done to slaves, those were specifically things. The Torah says if a person does that, then you are mandated to free the slave. So, for example, the Torah tells us what probably the most famous Jewish slave who was a slave to the Pelishtim who was taken as a slave, as a captive of war? Shimshon, Samson. And what do they do to Samson? They gouge his eyes. Right? There's all these midrashic explanations which all have deeper meaning, but the simple understanding is this is what they did to slaves. In Judaism, right? So to the point that basically this is almost like a euphemism. It's like a way of saying slavery. And that's what they're saying. They're saying, Moshe, you're treating us like we're slaves. Right? You are like this king. You're treating us like slaves. You're going to blind us? Is this what it's all about? It's all about your power? So, right, they're accusing Moshe of being power hungry. That's what they're saying. You're trying to be our master. You're trying to enslave us. Right? But what is their main argument? What are they saying that Moshe has not done? Moshe has not given them I don't know, how would you say it? What is the argument of Dasan and Aviram? Let me ask you this. Are they looking to be the Kohen Gadol? No. Wealth, materialism, enjoyment, pleasure, right? This sounds a little hedonistic, really, right? It's basically saying like, Moshe, where is the pleasure? Where's the pleasure that we were promised? The honey, the milk, the vineyards, we want to relax. Right? So immediately you start to see immediately that there are discrepancies. Again, I started this discussion with a deliberate reflection on like, what do we normally think about this story? And we normally think, hey, Korach and all the people, they wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. Korach wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. Dasan and Aviram want nothing to do with that. You see from this dialogue over here, they want to live a hedonistic lifestyle, right? They have nothing to do with wanting to be a Kohen Gadol. And you know what else is missing from this whole passage? We have no idea what the 250 men want. They are not Levium. They're not with Dasan and Aviram. There's no discussion. Moshe doesn't criticize them at all, right? All we see is Moshe criticizing the Korach, saying you have already too much. Don't ask to be a Kohen Gadol. You have Moshe talking to Dasan and Aviram, and you hear from their arguments what they're looking for, but we don't know where the 250 people lie. Yes?
So have they already been promised in those words that I will bring you to a land of Eretz
Yes. Yes.
They've already been promised that. So they know that they're going somewhere where they'll have it, and they're not willing to wait, and Israel means nothing.
Correct.
Don't they die out in the minute?
So the question is, right, so the question is when this takes place, okay? The simple read is, remember, we read Parshas Shlach, where they were told, you're going to spend 40 years in the deserts. This already takes place. Now, there are some, there's a principle, which we also touched upon in the past, about chronology when it comes to the Torah, right? There is a concept that is quoted in the Talmud which says, Ein mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah, which means that there isn't always first and second in the Torah. The Torah is not a storybook. It's not a history book. It's a story. It's a book of morality. It's a book about lessons, right? And therefore, there is a little bit flexibility. Sometimes the Torah will say, the Talmud will tell us, our sages will tell us, this passage is out of order. And he's like, how can you do that? Well, if you're writing a history book, you can't put things out of order. If that's not your focus, Okay, that's okay. So the question is how liberal we could be with moving these things around. The Ibn Ezra, one of the medieval commentators, says this whole passage took place after the sin of the golden calf. Okay, which is before, which would align with what you're saying. They're about to go into the land of Israel, and they're like, nah, where's the land of Israel? There are others, which we'll see soon, who say, no, read this chronologically, and the chronology is actually quite important, according to a number of interpretations. But again, let's just quickly summarize what we've seen and what our questions are. We see Korach come. First, we see this mob come to Korach. There is Korach, there is Dasan, there's Aviram, there's On, who we never hear about again, by the way, and there's 250 men. It seems like they're arguing, they all want to be, have positions of leadership. They don't want Moshe, they don't want Aaron. But then we start to push a little bit on it. We start to, you push on it. Things are starting to fall in different boxes. Korach is clearly after being a Kohen. That's what Moshe is saying. You're already a Levi. You want to be the priest. You want to take over Aaron's job. You want to have the priesthood. Okay. Dasan and Aviram, we find them saying that that what they're after, it sounds like what they're after is something more about pleasure. And we have no mention of the 250 people. Okay. So again, we have to understand how they join together, what the 250 people are after, and the last thing we have to understand is what is this test all about? Moshe says, okay, this is how we're going to clarify everything. Everyone go grab a frying pan from your kitchen, okay? And go ahead and put ketores, incense, in there. Like, why is that the test? Why is that the test? Now, the test is ultimately, if a fire comes down from heaven, on the people it comes down from, that's the one that shows that God is, if there's a fire, the heavenly fire, that shows that God is connected to that person. But if there isn't, or there's something else, then God is not choosing you. So why that test? In other words, there are other tests that we could have had. We could have had, for example, Elijah, Eliyahu, and Mount Carmel. What is the test over there? They have another showdown. And there Eliyahu is competing, so to speak, with the priests of this very popular pagan worship called Baal. And they each go ahead and bring animals, okay? And they both pray, and whoever has a godly fire come down, that's the one who demonstrates that this is the one. Over here, that's not the test. Over here, the test is the fire pans. Why? What is there? Is that just, I don't know, it's easy. Everyone had their own fire pan, so let's do this. Like,
well, doesn't the Kohen Gadol have the special incense for the special sacrifices?
He does. He does, but he doesn't. So, there is a unique Kohen Gadol incense offering done on Yom Kippur, but there is an incense offering that is done daily that every one of the priests do. And there are also other unique offerings that are brought by the Kohen Gadol. Why this? Why this? Okay.
We have priests today.
We do. We don't have a temple where they could serve, but we do have priests. So that we still have people who have lineage to the family of the Levites or Kohanim. They'll get the first Aliyah. We'll give them.
Christians took that word.
Oh, the word. Yeah, the word. But we do. The word is Kohen. Kohen. We do have.
Our priests are called Kohen.
Correct. That's the Hebrew word over here. Exactly. Okay, so let's now jump into some of the commentators, see what they have to say. Let's begin with the Ramban Nachmanides. If you turn the page to the second side, the Ramban gives us a little bit of the context to this story, and we'll use it as a starting point. So it says the Ramban, if you look on the second page, it says the Ramban, Bnei Israel, during their stay in the wilderness of Sinai, experienced no harm. Even in the instance of the calf, which constituted a grave and well-known sin, the casualties were few. Right? So a few days after they received the Torah, the Jewish people serve this golden calf. What happens? More or less, a few people die. Not nothing, but they survive, right? Despite the fact that it was a really big deal, Moshe is able to save them. They were spared through the prayers of Moshe, who pleaded on their behalf for 40 days and 40 nights. They thus loved him as they loved themselves and obeyed him. And if someone had rebelled against Moshe at that time, the nation would have stoned him. Right? In other words, Moshe's popularity, if there was like a CNN or Fox poll on Moshe's popularity at the time after the golden calf, it was rock solid. It was really high because he had just saved their lives, right? It's like it's like World War, I don't know, it's the person who saves you from the onslaught. Moshe's big stuff. You can't mess with Moshe at that time, okay? Okay. Korach therefore tolerated Aaron's stature, and the firstborn tolerated the stature of the Levium, as well as everything Moshe did. But when they arrived in the wilderness of Paran, and they were burnt by the fires of Tav'era, and many people perished in Kivrot Taiva, and when they sinned in the incident of the scouts, Moshe did not pray for them, and the decree was not annulled, and the leaders of all the tribes died in a plague before God, and it was decreed that the entire nation would perish in the wilderness and die there, then the nation's soul was embittered. They felt in their hearts that mishaps would result from Moshe's orders. Korach thus found an opportunity to oppose Moshe's actions, figuring that now the nation would listen to him. So the Ramban is suggesting that Korach was a very impressive politician. He knew to bide his time, right? You have to know exactly when to speak up, when to attack, when to rebel. And Korach was waiting from the moment that Aaron was appointed as Kohen Gadol, as we're about to see in more detail. From that moment, Korach was jealous, and Korach wanted to push back, but he knew he couldn't mess with Moshe. You have to know people's popularity. And so he waited. This was a low point because there was a number of instances. The sins of the spies was just the last one after a long list of different things. The one immediately before that, which I want to highlight because we're going to come back to it, is something called kivros hata'ava. Kivros literally means burial places, a kever, and ta'ava means of like lust, of yearning, of wanting something. And what took place over there, if you recall, it was not such a well-known episode, but the Jewish people complained to God, despite the fact that they received daily man and daily waters. They say, God, we want meat. We want steak. We're not content with just having this delicious man and not content with having this miraculous water. We want meat. And ultimately God says, you want meat? I'll give you meat. They get meat, and God actually punishes them because they went overboard. This was an inappropriate request on their part, okay? So keep that in mind because we're going to come back to it. But what we see, at least according to the Ramban, is that the timing is very significant. First of all, Korach was just waiting for an opportunity for Moshe's popularity to go down, okay? And that's when he steps up. Now, we still haven't addressed what was Korach's issue. And now we're going to see it in more detail. If you look at the breakdown of sins, look at the Ramban. Korach, he says, was angered by the appointment of Elitzaphan as leader over the Levite family of Kehat, as our sages say, and he envied Aaron too. As it says, and you seek priesthood as well. So what the Ramban is telling us, and this I think we know, is that Korach's issue was the fact that he was part of which tribe? He was part of the Levite tribe, and everyone else in the family, all his cousins, are getting positions of great honor, and he's getting nothing. He's getting nothing. And that is why the Torah tells us over and over again, B'nai Levi, B'nai Levi. The message is, the reason that B'nai Levi is mentioned is because Korach recognizes he comes from a prestigious family, a family which is singled out, and his issue is, the singling out that he had was not enough. He's getting some role, but he wants more. And that's why he keeps on saying B'nai Levi, because his issue stems from the fact he's getting something, but he's not content with all that he has. He wants to get either the position of being the leader of that tribe, the prince of that tribe, or to be the Kohen Gadol. And that's again why B'nai Levi is mentioned over and over again. Moshe is saying, there's 11 tribes which have nothing special. You already are getting all these special honors, and you want more? What's going on over here? But that is really the main issue with Korach, is that he is looking for more. The reason he speaks up now is because there's no particular thing that's happened now other than Moshe's popularity going down, and therefore he thinks it's a good time to speak up. Yes?
But Dosan and Abiram have a very good argument, because they are going to all die in the wilderness. They're never going to see Eretz Yisrael, the land of milk and honey. I mean, blaming it on Moshe isn't right, because Hashem made that decree, but Moshe didn't pray for them. So don't they have a good argument?
It might be a true argument, but I don't know if it's a good argument.
I mean, a true argument.
No, I'm not trying to be difficult. But what they're saying is honest. Is honest arguments. But what are they after, ultimately? It sounds like, right, what are they, right? In other words, it could be true, but it's not always the right meaning. So therefore, Moshe, what we're saying is true. It's accurate. But what they're saying is that this existence is not a good existence, and they're saying we don't want Moshe to be leading us because we don't like this existence. So what they're saying is true, but what are they asking for? They're asking people to say, they're essentially saying we want a hedonistic lifestyle.
But they're also saying we don't take responsibility for what happened. It's all your responsibility. It doesn't matter.
That's true
how
too.
bad we were.
That's true
It's
too.
all your responsibility, and we want what we want in any case.
That's true.
They're like leaving aside the spies and all the other people.
Right. There's an abdication of responsibility. That's a very fair point. They're saying that it's all Moshe's fault. Why did this happen? Okay, good. So let's just read one more commentary, and then we'll pull some of this together. The Netziv lived only 150 years ago or so, and he says as follows, and we've kind of been alluding to this throughout, but now we'll see this crystal clear. He says, we must realize and understand from the entire discussion in the Parsha, from the progression of the dispute and the punishment that befalls them, that Korach, Dasan, and Aviram, and the 250 men were not equal. Okay, so he says that we have to look at the dispute, we have to think about how people were punished, they were not equal, neither in terms of their merits, nor regarding the intent behind their struggle. Okay, so first of all, he says, we have to realize that, again, when we think of the story, we think about it as we were taught when we were 5, 10, 13, 14, and that's a mistake. We're taught things in a simplified fashion, and we have to graduate from that. And we have to ask ourselves, when you look at the text, you see that it's not just one group. They come as one group, but really there are all these different pockets. And some are more elevated, some are different. And also he says we have to think about how what their arguments are and what their punishments are. Okay, so let's keep on reading. For we see that only Korach and the 250 men, not Dasan and Aviram, participated in the taking of the incense pans. Okay, did you notice that? In other words, that when we look at the incense, we didn't see this together inside. But God says, Moshe says, everyone grab incense pans. And the Torah tells us, the passage we didn't see, that Korach takes an incense pan, the 250 men take incense, but Dasan and Aviram don't take incense. Okay, so even in the test, only some of them engage in the test, some of them don't. Okay, so that should tell us something. Okay, let's keep on reading. Also, the Almighty dealt with the 250 men honorably, as we will explain, but not with Korach, Dasan, and Aviram. What he means by that is as follows. How did everyone die in this story? Yes, but no, not really. We're going to use the white, finally, it gets to use the whiteboard in this class. Okay, here we go. We're going to make a little chart here to make our life a little bit easier. Okay, everyone can see it? I hope so. Okay. Dun-dun-dun. Okay, let's do this. Let's try to figure out how we can make a nice chart. Okay, Dasan, here we go. Let's do like this. Korach is okay. Okay, we have 250, and we have, my handwriting is, and Dasan and Aviram. Okay, good? Clear enough? Okay? Korach, 250 men, Dasan and Aviram. Okay, the test, the fire pan test. Sorry for my not neat handwriting. Fire pan test. We have Korach did it, 250 people did it, Dasan and Aviram did not do it. Okay? So far so good? Okay, but here's another difference. How do they die? Death. Okay, they all die at the end of the story. Okay, you all said what happens? The earth swallows them up. Okay, so that is true, swallow. The Torah says swallow. It says swallow, but you are incorrect over here, I'm sorry.
Fire.
There's a fire. There's a heavenly fire that, let's actually do this better. Okay, earth.
What's DNA? What's that mean?
Dasan and Aviram.
Who is it?
Dasan and Aviram. Those were the two people listed in the earlier in the narrative, right?
Who were they?
Two people who we read about. They told us that they want the land, they want the vineyards, they want all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. So what's interesting over here is that there's nothing's adding up, right? In other words, these people, fire pan test, these people are together. When it comes to death, they die by earth, he dies by fire. Okay? So what you see over here is that clearly there's just a lot going on that's not aligning. Is this making sense, right? There's just gaps over here. So let's keep on reading, and then we'll try to pull this together. But the point that the Netziv is making is that there are differences, okay? Fine, he goes on to say that clearly, he says, we must therefore understand that the 250 men were actually spiritual giants of Israel in every detail, even in fear of God. And then, fine, let's just pause over there. So what the Netziv is telling us is that the 250 people have to be judged, have to be seen differently. Right? And you could think just very superficially, the difference between dying by earth and dying by a heavenly fire tells you something already. A heavenly fire, just symbolically, when you think of earth, you think of materialism, you think of things which are very earthy, things which are very much physical, right? Whereas a fire has this different spiritual, has much more, and you want to if you look up images for spirituality, apparently I may have done that once or twice, and the images you normally get are pictures of a fire, right? Something which is going up to the heavens, right? So there's one group is seen as, even their death, you see, is a reflection of who they are. One group is seen as a fire, one group is seen as earth, okay? So let's just try to pull this together. I'm going to share with you an idea with some of the background that we have from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Gush Etzion, a very prominent Hester Yeshiva in Israel. Actually, during the war against Iran, last week, their website was hacked by Iranians. And actually had some terrible messages on their website. The yeshiva was very proud. They're like, obviously you made it. If they have to hack your website, that means you're someone special. Okay, their website is up and running. It's a beautiful website with a lot of beautiful Torah. But he says like this. He says, let's review that the story begins. The chronology is important. We know for Korach, what he was waiting for was a low point in Moshe's popularity, right? But let's think about the other things that just took place. One of the things that just took place is the Jewish people saying, we want more meat. We want more. So let's go back to Dasan and Aviram. Dasan and Aviram, what are they asking for? What are they saying? They want fields and vineyards. They want, they're hedonists, essentially. They're basically saying, and for them, perhaps the timing is the Jewish people, they've been waiting all this time. They've been sitting in their tents saying, we can't stand this desert. There's no air conditioning. You think it's hot in Baltimore. I can't breathe over here. The desert air, it's terrible. We're getting mun. We want to get steaks. We want this good life. But no one's going to listen to them. No one's going to listen to them. But now, Kivros HaTaiva, you have this moment when all the people are saying, hey, we want meat. All of a sudden, this is their moment. This is their moment to shine. Right? Yes, and Moshe's popularity is declining, but this is the moment when they say, we're trending in our right direction. We're trending towards a more hedonistic people. And they say, Moshe, you're taking us in the wrong direction, not just geographically, but you're taking us this spiritual existence. We want vineyards. We want fields. We want to go back to Egypt. We want this life of enjoyment, right? That is their argument. Their argument is, especially after Kivros HaTaiva, we want more hedonism. We want more enjoyment. That is what we're after. Okay? But let's go back to the 250 men, because Moshe never explicitly criticizes them. He speaks to Korach, you want your priesthood. He speaks to Dasan and Aviram, but he never really explicitly criticizes the 250 men. And as we saw, the Netziv says that those 250 men were seemingly very holy. And how do we know they're holy? Partially because of how they die. They die with the fire. Okay? So one of the questions we asked is, why do they have the fire pan test? And the mystics tell us that when it comes, and you can understand this, that out of all the different, senses that we have, senses, meaning the 5 senses we have, the one that is the least physical is what? Our sense of smell. Smell is always associated with things which are very spiritual. You don't really need, it's nice to have a sense of smell. If anyone here had COVID at some point and lost their sense of smell, you need to touch things, you need to see things, you need to hear things, you need to taste things, but smelling is helpful, but it's not as necessary. It's almost like extra, it's almost beyond, okay? So spirituality is always associated with things which are smell. The incense are something which are about smell. That's what incense are. We know that Korach is taking incense because he wants to say, I'm a Kohen Gadol, Aaron's not a Kohen Gadol. Why are these 250 men taking the incense? It's not about leadership. Where else do we find someone taking incense? Sons of Aaron, right? The sons of Aaron go ahead and they take incense. And what do we know about them? And I think we discussed this together. They were ascetics. They were basically saying, if you recall, I think we had a whole class on this, where Moshe, Aaron, and Nadav and Avihu, the 2 sons of Aaron, they all go into the Ohel Moed, they all go into the tent, the Mishkan, and Moshe and Aaron go back to the people, and Nadav and Avihu, they go away from the people. They want to just be in the heavens. They want to be on the hilltops. They want to be just with them and God. They don't want to be connected to the world, which God says that is not the way. God ultimately, they die by this heavenly fire. But it's almost like it's a very different type of death. It's a very different type of flaw. It's a flaw of saying, we're so connected to God, we don't want to be connected to this physical world which takes us down. We don't want to deal with the tension of dealing with whether it's a family or a job and all the tensions. We want to go to a monastery and we want to just meditate and be connected to God, which sounds very spiritual. It's just that it's not our version of spirituality. Our version of spirituality is one where we connect heaven and earth, but we can understand and appreciate where they're coming from. So says Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in as much as Dasan and Aviram saw that moment when the Jewish people said, we want more food, and they say, this is our moment. We're going to get more people connected to our hedonistic, platform, and we're going to get more people focusing on food and meat and all that stuff, and they say, now we're going to rebel and say, we want more fields and vineyards. The 250 men say the exact opposite. They say, oy vavai, this is terrible. Look where the Jewish people are going. Right? They're completely falling apart. They're becoming more focused on their material, physical, basic hedonistic needs. And they say, really, there's a mistake over here. We need to live a life which is far more spiritual. We need to live a life which has no connection to the physical world. Their arguments, suggest Rav Lichtenstein, like Nadav and Avihu, were that they were saying, we want to have a totally spiritual life. This balancing act is not working. They're criticizing the Judaism as we know it, but they're coming from a very good place. They're saying we can't live with this balance, with this tension. They're arguing we need to have our service of God should not even include animal sacrifice. Because animal sacrifice does what? Animal sacrifice, you bring the offering, part of it gets burnt on the mishkan, and on the altar, on the mizbeach, and part of it gets eaten by the people. It's still a party. It's a barbecue. It's a holy barbecue, but it's still a barbecue, right? And these people say, no more barbecues, no more meat, no more, this existence is not good. Look what's happening. We're falling apart. And they say, we need to go to this extreme. We need to become ascetics. And therefore, these 250 people are indeed truly holy people. Again, the problem is, it's not Judaism. Judaism says we have to live in that tension. Okay? So basically what's happening, if we were just to pull this back for a second, is there's really 3 boxes. And as you see, they're not all lining up for good reason. Right? We have Korach over here, who, he wants to be a priest. He wants to be a Kohen Gadol. So he takes the fire pan, because that's one of the things that the Kohen Gadol does, to see if he's really going to be the next priest. It doesn't work out. He gets swallowed by the earth. Why does he get swallowed by the earth? Because his flaw was not a lofty flaw. His flaw was his ego. A very lowly flaw. It was about himself. And therefore his punishment is being swallowed up by the earth. Okay? Then you have the 250 people. They're saying that we want to live a life of just fire pans, just incense, a lofty, spiritual, ascetic life. And that's why they bring the fire pans. They are also mistaken, but it's a much loftier mistake. It's not coming from self-centeredness. It's not coming about their own needs. It's coming from, they want to be close to God. And therefore they're killed by this heavenly fire. God is, so to speak, taking him up as an offering. It's a mistake, but it's a much loftier mistake. Then we have Dasan and Aviram, okay, who, for them, they don't take the fire pan because they don't care to be priests. They don't care to go to the Mishkan. The Mishkan's a waste of space, a waste of time. It's a place, they just want meat. So they're not going to bother taking the fire pan test because they're after their own their own needs. And the earth swallows them up because their needs are ones which are much more grounded in the sense, not grounded in a positive sense. They are much more earthy. They're much more material. They're after material needs. Okay? Yes?
Couldn't you also say that Datan and Abiram altogether negate the existence of God? Because they don't take responsibility for the things that happen. God is the one that said that they will have to go in the desert. And the fire pans is a test from God. And if they don't, that's Narishkeit to them.
I agree. There's certainly a lack of belief in their actions and in their words. I think in terms of their primary sin, I think they're, from listening to the words that they say, you're right. I think there's more underneath which is leading them to that, meaning a person who lives a hedonistic life.
Why wouldn't you take the fire pans? Because you don't believe in the dead.
Right. Or, correct. So I think that's underlying what they're saying 100%. Yes.
Okay, this is probably just for David and I, but the Torah is the 5 books of Moses.
Yes.
So when he gets the
Okay. So what ends up happening, if you think about this whole story, is that, again, we started off with the premise that they're all coming together with this unified front against Moshe and Aaron. In truth, not only are they not unified, but their arguments are actually completely contradictory. Right? In other words, on the one, the 250 people say, we want to just be complete ascetics, none of this leadership, we just want to be, focused on God, okay? And then, but it's all about asceticism. And then you have Dasan and Aviram all about hedonism, right? In other words, they're literally diametrically opposed from one another. One is over here, one is over there, and then you have Korach, who's simply after his own personal pride, gain, and has a completely different argument. Right? You see, in other words, they're all together in their, the famous phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that's true in the short term. Right? You think about different countries where you had, think of like, Russia, 100 years ago or so, a little bit earlier, when they overthrow the Tsar and all that, and they basically take over, and they're all opposed to the Tsar, but they're not actually all together. So what happens next? When they finish throwing off the Tsar, then they kill each other, right? Until one group ultimately succeeds. That's what's happening over here. They're not actually unified at all against Moshe. They're actually fighting with one another, which, by the way, if you go back to that opening Mishnah, you see something fascinating. What does the Mishnah say? What is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven? The opening line that we started off, right? The dispute for the sake of heaven is the dispute between Hillel and Shammai, right? Hillel against Shammai. What is a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? What should it say if it's parallel? If you're writing this, it should say the dispute between Korach and his followers and Moshe. But that's not what it says. It says the dispute that is not for the sake of heaven is the dispute between Korach and his followers. Because he's arguing with the followers, right? In other words, they're actually arguing with one another. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like they're arguing with Moshe, but in truth, when we look deeply, right, they're actually Hillel and Shammai, Korach and his followers. They're diametrically opposed to one another. They're in dispute with one another, right? And the Mishnah is written perfectly in that respect.
What's the difference between the Mishnah and and the,
We'll talk about it at the end. I just want to pull this together for 1 second. And so ultimately, what I think, if we want to make this practical to ourselves, I think, unfortunately, whether we watch it in the news or sometimes we engage in it ourselves, sometimes there are disputes. And, it's safe to say that everyone in this dispute thought they were right. In other words, you have to be pretty, confident in your own righteousness to go ahead and take a fire pan, right, and get in a fight with Moshe, who, he's the 10 plagues, splitting the sea, bring the Torah down guy, same person. And they're saying, we're going to go ahead, and we have this legitimate argument, right? And so there's this self-righteousness which fuels an argument, which gets us all worked up, and we know we're right. And they clearly thought they're right. They're basically going ahead, showdown with Moshe, right? And not only were they not right, but there was actually no coherence whatsoever to their arguments. It is a cautionary tale to what the dangers of argument are, in the sense that we could get so swept up, and when we just start to push a little bit just to push on it a little bit, you say, what do we have? Sometimes you can find yourself in a dispute with a friend, a spouse, whatever it is, and maybe a week later, what are we arguing about again? Huh? Why? You have so many people tell me, I'm on a long fight. I haven't spoken to my spouse in a month. Oh, interesting. What were you guys fighting about? No idea. Oh, fantastic. Okay, that's crazy. But that's the danger of arguments, right? That you have over here. You have 3 groups of people. They are not only not even aligned, they're diametrically opposed, but yet they're coming together because it's easy to be against. When we push on it a little bit, we see how foolish, how contradictory things are, and just the dangers, the absolute dangers of argument. The Torah tells us, Rashi quotes over here, that argument that when it comes to most sins, there's punishment only for adults, right? God only holds adults accountable, but yet we know at the end of this episode, for those who got swallowed up, it wasn't just the people who were involved, but it impacted their families as well. The children got swept up in the ground. Not that the children were guilty, but the point is that the danger, that what it's trying to say is that arguments are like this uncontrollable thing. You start with the small thing, and then it grows, and we get more and more heated and more, tunnel vision where we can't see beyond. And that is what the story is, a cautionary tale against the danger of getting worked up, the danger of argument, the danger of being against, and not thinking about what we're really for, what it's about, and being calm. And hopefully we can take this to heart. Okay, thank you.